Welcome to the Unpacking the Framework video series. This series provides valuable information about the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. My name is Denise Luscombe, and this video introduction is being recorded on Whadjuk Noongar Budja. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the land you're listening from, and recognise their continued connection to country, waterways and community. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This video is one of a series that describes the evidence and practice information that underpins the principles of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. You will hear from both national and international speakers throughout this video series. This video covers rights-based, a universal principle of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention, and is presented by our national speaker, Professor John Tobin. John is a professor at Melbourne Law School, where he holds the Francine V McNiff Chair in International Human Rights Law. He commenced his career as a lawyer, working in the Youth Justice Legal Service at Victoria Legal Aid, where he was a representative for children in the criminal justice and child protection systems. He also spent time working in legal policy for the Department of Justice before moving into an academic career at Melbourne University, where he has taught and undertaken research on children's rights for the past 25 years. He completed his PhD on children's right to health in 2008 and is the author of nearly 100 scholarly works on human and children's rights. He's the editor of the award-winning The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, a Commentary, which was published in 2019 by Oxford University Press. John has provided consultancies, training and workshops on children's rights and the idea of a rights-based approach to matters concerning children to a vast range of groups, including judges, policymakers, practitioners and advocates in a vast range of fields, including youth justice, child protection, health, education and early childhood.
Thanks for that kind introduction, Denise. So my aim is to provide you all with an overview of what it means to have a rights-based approach to early childhood intervention. Before I outline this model, I want you to start thinking about some answers to these key reflective questions. So why should we as a community care about and in fact invest resources in early childhood intervention? What motivates you as a professional to work in this sector? What words would you use to describe the children for whom you provide services and their families? And why do the answers to these questions matter? So my argument is, when we think about those questions and the answers we give, that will reveal our values when it comes to issues around early childhood intervention. Those values inform our motivations as to whether we take actions or fail to take actions to address the needs and interests of children in this sector. So when it comes to a rights-based approach, my argument is that historically, we've adopted what's called largely a welfare-based approach. We identify the deficits of children. Now, motivations are good. We want to help children in need, but we define children largely by reference to their vulnerability, their lack of maturity, the lack of expertise, and the need for us to use our care and compassion to assist them as well. Under that model, children must be seen, but there's no need to necessarily hear their voices or their views. So again, our motivations are very well intended, but we are, in my mind, under a rights-based approach, failing to identify the strengths of these young people as well. So under a rights-based approach, we're recognizing the vulnerabilities of children, they still exist, but also identifying their strengths. So children are also capable and resilient. They have evolving capacities and insights into their own situation and needs. They have lived experiences which provide them with expertise. From a rights-based perspective, they have an entitlement to rights, to claim things from adults and the state about what they're entitled to enjoy. And importantly, and most critically, children must be seen, heard, and taken seriously. So where do children's rights come from? The simple answer is they come from a document called the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is an international treaty adopted back in 1989. All states, with the exception of America, have signed and ratified this treaty. So in a country like Australia, we are in theory bound to comply with the obligations under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. When we think about a rights-based approach, we will be drawing on the convention to inform our understanding of this particular approach. But at the same time, I don't want you to be distracted by the legal considerations. It's more the values and the ideas that inform and underlie the convention, and the principles will inform our practice. So what are the core principles of a rights-based approach? You'll see here I've outlined 5 core principles that I think are essential to understanding a rights-based approach for children in the context of early childhood intervention. So first is this idea of non-discrimination. That essentially means we can't treat children differently because of their differences or their attributes. So in the context of early childhood intervention, because a child has a disability doesn't mean they're entitled to less rights. On the contrary, we must take what we call special measures to ensure that such children enjoy all the rights that all children are supposed to enjoy as well. So in this sense, Article 2 aligns with what might be considered to be an equity focus, which you hear in some contexts around things like public health and involvement with children in certain contexts as well. The second core principle is the idea of a child's best interests. This is an idea I'm assuming you'll all be familiar with. It's a core feature of the historical welfare-based approach where we elevate children's interests into conversations concerning their well-being. And importantly, from a rights-based perspective, children's best interests must be a primary consideration, a central issue that comes into the decision-making matrix about how we undertake issues to address these young people and their needs. So in that way, it reflects what we might call a child-centered approach. The third core approach I've identified is, in fact, Article 6, the right to life, survival, and development. This is quite a novel idea in international human rights law, but it's really important from a child perspective. Not enough to be able to live if you haven't got a life that allows you to develop to your full capacities. So the idea of development is about saying we as a state and a society must create the conditions that allow for all children to survive and to thrive. Thrive in an entirely holistic sense. So it's not just physical development, it's mental, spiritual, social development as well. So in that way, it aligns in some ways with what we might call a development approach to issues concerning early childhood intervention, informed by the practice about what is in fact best for children in those circumstances. Core principle 4 is this central idea of child participation, which I'll explore in a bit more detail shortly. But essentially here we're saying, unlike under a classic welfare-based approach, we have to now start elevating children's views and voices into all matters affecting them, and those views and voices having an impact on how we deliver services for these young people as well. So in that sense, it mimics what we might call a strength-based approach or agency or participatory methods when it comes to early childhood intervention as well. You'll see I've added Article 5, which is really important. This is important in the sense that what it says is that when understanding children's rights, we must also respect the rights and duties of parents to provide guidance and assistance to children as they age in light of their evolving capacities. So why is this important? Because under this model, we're not saying that children enjoy rights in a way that's separate from their parents, but in fact, it's in a relationship to their parents, and parents have a special guiding role to play in enabling children to enjoy those rights. So in that sense, we see an alignment with what we call a relational approach to early childhood intervention. We're trying to understand and support communities and systems of practice that will support children with a primary focus on the parent's role in that context. So importantly, when we're thinking about early childhood intervention, we also want to identify that Convention on the Rights of the Child provides some really significant obligations with respect to parents and their children and their parents. So Article 23 has a focus on ensuring the dignity, promoting the self-reliance, and facilitating child's active participation in the community. So here you see that really participatory model that reflects the foundations of a rights-based approach. This need to take additional measures, though, to enable and support children with a disability in the context of early childhood intervention. Importantly as well, we're looking at the idea that we must provide special care and attention, assistance, okay, to those who are responsible for the care of their child as well. So we're seeing a support system whereby we have both the child, their parents, and then the broader community via professionals like yourselves, as supported by the state, to provide assistance for children and their parents. That assistance that comes under a rights-based approach is also reflected in other provisions under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 18, as you'll see here, talks about the need to provide appropriate assistance to parents when it comes to looking after their children. And Article 27 provides a similar role. So the important point here is that we see the child within a nest, essentially, of support systems that start with the parents and then the broader state, often through the work of yourselves in providing assistance and care to those families as they require to ensure that a child can enjoy all those rights around survival, development, and thriving. But as I mentioned before, in some ways, the most radical element of a rights-based approach and how it differs from other frameworks is this idea of ensuring that we give effect to children's voices and views. So Article 12 of the Convention says that state parties shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child. The views of the child being given due weight in accordance with the age and maturity of the child. Now, for many of you, I imagine in practice, you are already engaging with children, recognizing their agency, trying to find ways to elevate their views and voices into the practice you undertake. This Article 12 imposes a really strict obligation on the state to create the systems that will allow both you and those children to ensure that those views are being heard. It's challenging. When you reflect on these questions here, it makes us ask things like, so when is a child capable of forming his or her own views? We often assume it's a child who is in the older stages of adolescence, 13, 14, 15, where we start to take those views seriously. Under a rights-based approach, we're being forced to think about the capacity of very, very young children, certainly children in the context of early childhood, to be able to express their views. Next question, how do children express their views? It's not just through the oral written form. A whole other range of measures are used by children to express their views. Body language, withdrawal, singing, dancing, drawing. So we, as practitioners, are being asked to think about how can we draw on all those things we see in practice to actually enable children to express those views. What matters affect children? Well, this is a very broad conversation. And again, we're being encouraged to think broadly to identify how we can bring those views into the way in which we provide services for children in the context of early childhood as well. Then I've asked a question for you all to be reflecting on in your own practice. Well, how do you in your professional capacity take active measures to ensure that children's views are heard in relation to matters that affect them? This is not an easy task and it requires some reflection because as adults, we often forget. We start to think that we are the experts in contexts where in fact there may be expertise that lies with children as well. This is the idea of co-collaboration, cooperation in enabling us to provide services for young people in these contexts as well. And the last point is important as well. So Article 12 isn't saying that children's views are determinative of issues affecting them, but it's asking us to treat them seriously. So how can we ensure that when we undertake measures to enable children to express those views, they're heard and then taken seriously in decision-making around how we develop the services to assist those children in those contexts? So let's recap some of the theory and the normative standards. Simply, we're thinking about the idea that human rights are grounded in the idea of the dignity of every child. All children have value no matter their capacity. As a way of ensuring and recognizing that dignity, all children are entitled to a range of human rights to protect their unique and special interests. We have special interests and special rights for children who may have a disability. The rights under international law focus on protection of various things such as violence, provision of various services such as health and education, and importantly, as we've identified, the idea of children being active participants in matters that affect them. These rights are understood as being relational, not in the individual sense, because they are to be enjoyed and balanced alongside parental rights. And importantly, really importantly, states have an obligation to secure these rights. So accountability lies at the heart of a rights-based approach as well. So how do we take this model and apply it in practice in four contexts: advocacy, policy design, service delivery, and finally, research in the context of early childhood intervention. Advocacy first. So here we'll be able to argue that when we're looking to try and challenge or change the way in which governments allocate resources to support this sector, we can be drawing on international law and the Convention on the Rights of the Child to say that states have an obligation under international law to provide those resources that are required to ensure that children enjoy those rights in this context. So this is a system whereby we're lobbying for change. We're asking the government to fulfill its obligations to provide appropriate care, appropriate assistance to support both parents and professionals when they deliver special, tailored, appropriate services for children in the early childhood intervention sector. Policy design. So we're thinking about here, well, how do we use a rights-based approach to shape and develop the very policies that will inform this sector? And one way of thinking about this is what's called the 3AQ model. It's a way of giving meaning to the obligation to ensure that we develop appropriate services, appropriate systems to meet and secure the rights of children in early childhood intervention. The first part of that model says we make those services available. That's the easy part in some respects. It does require funding, but then the second part becomes, well, how do we make them accessible as well? Accessibility has a number of limbs. One's about actually ensuring that it's accessible to all children in all parts of a state. So that's the rural and urban divide, ensuring we don't prioritise and overlook the needs of children in remote or rural communities. The second is making it financially accessible. Can, in fact, children and their families afford to access the services we're providing for them? And then it's also important to ensure we have information accessibility. So are families and children aware of the services that they can utilise to ensure that children can enjoy their rights? And the last point is an easy one in the sense of making sure all those services are non-discriminatory. So all children, irrespective of background, race, religion, gender, are able to access those services as well. The third limb is acceptability. This is where we start to draw on our idea about participation. What we're saying here is that when we create services, they must be acceptable in terms of being age appropriate, hence the need to get engaged with young people themselves. Also take into account things around issues such as culture and religion to ensure we provide culturally appropriate services for children in different contexts as well. And there's also issues around, for example, gender as well and sexual orientation, which may be taken into account as well. And then finally, this issue of quality. So this is about ensuring that we are able to ensure appropriate resources to fund, support, and in fact pay for professionals who work in this sector to ensure the highest quality of provision of services as well. So then how do we apply a rights-based approach when it comes to actually the coalface? We're actually developing and delivering the policies in practice to children in early childhood intervention settings. So historically, the argument might be that we've had a strong welfare-based conception of children, whereby we define them largely through their deficits, again, as I said at the start of the presentation. So we're still keen to actively intervene in their worlds to provide assistance to them, but we perhaps don't always recognise their capacities as well. So under a traditional or welfare-based model, we are essentially treating children as objects of our protection and they are in need of protection. Under a rights-based approach, we're shifting the way we engage with young people, shifting the way we engage with their families to recognise it as a much more collaborative enterprise. So children themselves become agents with capacity. We can provide support for their decision-making. We recognise their resilience and expertise, and they become subjects of assistance who are entitled to rights, okay, and in fact have expertise. So we're shifting the way we think about and engage with young people so they're much more active participants in the provision of those services to enable recognition and realisation of their rights. Now, doing that is difficult, but under a rights-based approach, there are many models now we have to actually enable and facilitate children's views to take those into account in the way we both design and also deliver services for children as well. So you see here one model is one developed by Laura Lundy. It's used very, very widely. It relies on providing a space for children to express their views, enabling and assisting them to actually express their views, their voice, ensuring that we have an audience to hear those views, and then lastly, ensuring influence. They're taken into account in the way in which we design and deliver those services for those young people as well. This model, as I said, is a very simple way of thinking about the 4 elements of any participatory measures we might use to, in fact, adopt a rights-based approach. Now, for those of you who are also working in the field of research in early childhood intervention, a rights-based approach is always also relevant. So historically, in most research concerning children, and particularly younger children, we tend to see children as an object of inquiry. We do research on children. They have no role in the research question, the methodology, or the evaluation. They are very much seen, but not heard. In a rights-based approach to research concerning issues around children, we see children as having a different role. They become subjects and potential participants in the actual research endeavour. So we do research with and for children rather than on them. Children potentially have a role in designing the research question, informing the research methodology, being part of the evaluation, and also potentially dissemination. Now, that can be challenging, particularly with early childhood contexts where children are quite young, but the idea is to start exploring the possibilities of having them as co-collaborators rather than assuming that they lack the competence as well. The key point here is we're thinking to ensure that children are always seen, heard, and actively involved in research concerning how we can best ensure the delivery of rights-based approaches to early childhood intervention initiatives as well. Now, importantly here, this model here I'm talking about is focusing on children, but these same considerations apply equally to the adults and carers of these children as well. They become active participants in designing and delivering effective systems of support for these families. So, to try and recap, you'll see in this model here, this idea of nesting the child within a system of supports. So the child, obviously, first tier of support is from from family members, parents primarily, carers, and the broader family network as well. Then, of course, we have professionals using their skill sets to assist parents and children. And then the outer layer, of course, is the state. And I've also identified here the broader community, because we need to get community recognition of the role the state plays in supporting and enabling professionals to support parents to support and scaffold their child. And that goes back to those first slides I talked about. Why do we as a community want to invest resources and time into early childhood intervention? So under a rights-based approach, the answer is children have a right to have those support services in place, as do their parents. So we're developing a system whereby there's essentially a relationship between children, their parents, and of course professionals in the state, which is based on an entitlement that young people have, and then an obligation for the state to provide the resources to ensure provision of those services. Or we talk about it in terms of accountability. So in this sense, it adds a layer to other models or frameworks around thinking about early childhood intervention. The ultimate aim, of course, is to ensure that young people in the context of early childhood intervention are given every chance to realise their full potential, to reach their full development through the assistance of parents, professionals, and the broader community. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this video, part of the video series Unpacking the Framework for the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. The review of best practice in early childhood intervention was commissioned by the Department of Social Services. Led by the University of Melbourne, the project team included PRECI, professionals and researchers in early childhood intervention, Murdoch Children's Research Institute, SNAKE, National Voice for Our Children, Children and Young People with Disability Australia, and ACD, Advocating for Children with Disability. Coordination and production of the video series was led by PRECI.